feminism, the realm where real evidence and research are just obstacles to inhibit you from reaffirming your initial prejudices about how you're the victim. You're always the victim. But what would it look like if men acted like feminists?
Hello, and welcome to Factual Frequency, guaranteed to be at least 420% more accurate and well-researched than anything carried on a feminist frequency. Now, many of you will have heard these feminist analyses, how the patriarchy has turned women into objects.
We're thinking about the object-subject dichotomy. Subjects act, objects are acted upon.
This is via what's called the subject-object dichotomy. In the simplest terms, subjects act and objects are acted upon.
The subject. Subjects act while objects are acted upon. Now I know you're thinking, crazy Lacey, what's this got to do with sexuality? And the answer is everything.
Sex object.
Sex objects.
Sex objects.
Sexual objectification. Sexual objectification, sexually objectified.
Sex objects, sexual objects.
Sex objects, sex objects. Sexual objectification, sexual objects.
Sex object, sexually objectifying. I want to make an appeal first to logic. When we're talking about sex objects,
Sexual objectification.
Sex objects. Since these women are just objects,
sex object, when you
sexual objectification.
sex object.
Everything is sexist, everything is racist, everything is homophobic, and you have to point it all out.
Sex objects,
Sex objects,
sexual objectification,
sex objects,
and sexually objectifying.
sex objects,
Sexual object.
sex object, be sex objects.
Sexual objectification contributes to a culture where sexual violence isn't taken seriously.
So we go into parties and we know where we are in the pretty girl pecking order, and when another woman is valued for being a sex object, it actually makes us feel bad about ourselves.
This is the essence of what sexual objectification means.
This is some bullshit. Everyone should be pissed that this is so normal.
This is, of course, just a massive smokescreen to hide the fact that really it's feminist theory that's trying to hide the fact that it's turning men into objects. And once they've been turned into objects, violence against those objects becomes intrinsically permissible. Now, one of the things that women just cannot stand is to see people criticizing the media of their girls' club. So it's not going to be a surprise to see a bunch of feminists throwing what can only be described as big girl temper tantrums, simply because they don't like the authority of their privilege being challenged. I mean, don't they understand that it's possible to both enjoy a piece of work while still being critical of its more problematic aspects? And remember, just like with any feminist analysis, the more you disagree with what I say here, the more that just proves how correct I am and the need for me to say it. Indeed, let me go further to say that the word disagree sounds way too childish here. This is abuse, plain and simple, and abuse should not be tolerated. Maybe the most obvious way in which men have been turned into objects is by marriage. Here, women formally convey their ownership of their property by tagging it with a ring. The ring symbolizes that the man belongs to her. You see, it turns out that marriage, just like feminism, is a social construct, one that is deeply harmful to men in that it portrays men as a resource which women, by virtue of the privilege of their gender, may choose the ownership of. Now, not only does this ring symbolize ownership, but also the fact that she's entitled to own half of his property. Now, of course, it's no secret that feminist theory socially conditions men from an early age by the use of popular media, soap operas, computer games, and of course, chick flicks, that the ownership by a woman is the highest goal that they can achieve. They must be good listeners. They must be sensitive lovers. They must have a sense of humour, be nice to their mums, put up with her shit, and of course, tell her how much they love her on command, just like one of those drawstring dolls. Women then cynically objectify these attributes and assess the men based on them. The man is then either rewarded with ownership or discarded according to how the woman assessed the value of the male-bodied object. Occasionally, a woman might allow a male-bodied object to improve its value by suggesting that if it adopts the role of, say, a washing machine too, then it may be acceptable as ownership material. The woman may even try to coerce the object by offering it an incentive, say for instance, sex, in order to gain the ownership that she thinks that she is entitled to. This formal input-output system is clear. Sex is the input, and ownership is the output. The women are objectifying the men here in a way that they would objectify kitchen tiles. That is, if they are laid right once, then they can be walked all over for years. Yes, women are literally treating men like objects. They are completely interchangeable and can be replaced when they are worn out.
3/4 of Japanese household budgets are controlled by women. And making matters worse for the men is the fact that the average amount of their pocket money has halved since the early 1990s.
Now, many a chick flick will package this sexism under the title of romance to make it comfortably consumable. Like somehow calling it romance will make it somehow less sexist. But there's nothing laudable about trying to minimize and justify this systematic objectification of men. And these deeply troubling tropes are seen throughout popular media. The insidious nature of how feminist theory has turned men into objects is nowhere as graphically demonstrated as with sex toys. Here, women have literally replaced men with the disembodied sexual organ of a man. I've identified a list of criteria that are necessary for objectification, including instrumentality, commodification,
Interchangeability, violability, and disposability.
Since instrumentality is a core component of objectification, let's begin there. I use instrumentality to mean when a woman uses a man for a tool or as a prop for the woman's own purposes. So every time a woman asks a man to help her for something, say for instance heavy lifting, she is in fact using him as an instrument. Instrumentality is heavily linked to the commodification of men. Since objects can be bought and sold, it figures that once men have been turned into objects, their bodies or representations of their sexuality can also be bought and sold. Interchangeability. Since men serve identical or nearly identical roles within marriage, it is clear that feminist theory has educated women into the idea that men are as interchangeable as kitchen tiles. Since these men are just objects, their value to the woman is measured entirely in terms of what they can give to the woman. And since these men are just objects, there's no reason for the woman to have any emotional engagement with them at all. Now, of course, we can't really talk about objectification without addressing the issue of violence against men, since the two are intimately connected. Once a person has been reduced to the status of objecthood, violence against that object becomes intrinsically permitted.
Once a person is reduced to the status of objecthood, violence against that object becomes intrinsically permitted.
Oh my god!
This highlights two other insidious aspects of male objectification. The dehumanization caused by objectification inevitably leads us to the concept of disposability. As we can see, feminist theory has quite literally made men into objects. Oddly, while feminists refuse to permit males access to developing similar sex toys. This objectification of men is unacceptable, and the idea that it should be allowed as some sort of gritty art is just crazy, because there is nothing edgy or entertaining about portraying men's penises as sexual objects. In a world which is already ridden with jokes about cutting men's penises off, this toxic femininity promoted by feminist theory leads to an objectification of men which contributes to a culture where violence against men isn't taken seriously. And so does it surprise anyone that men make up 70% of the murder victims in the country, and over 9,000% of the people murdered in video games are men? This latter number is particularly disturbing as it's pandering to the power fantasies of young women. It's a rush concocted by a mix of sexual arousal connected to the act of controlling and punishing representations of male objects. Sadly, these digital murders and video game concepts encouraging violence against men have yet to lead to any real-world consequences. Now, many might say, okay, you have a point about feminist theory and you have a point about men being treated as objects, but is that really a reason to ban chick flicks? Well, research has repeatedly shown, actually over $500,000 of research has shown that people who blow this off as harmless entertainment are actually the people most likely to uncritically internalize harmful media messages.
In short, the more you think you cannot be affected, the more likely you are to be affected.
Ladies, you can do your part too. You can do your part to make the world a better place. Become a masculinist and a good ally. All you have to do is stop the propagation of these deeply harmful tropes. You can stop assessing men as a collection of objects and treat them like people. You can teach what you hear on this feminist frequency to school children and university courses. And remember, of course, when you find one man more attractive than another, that's because you've judged him as an object. It's not so much you found him sexy as you proved yourself to be a sexist. Remember, it's not sex that sells, but sexism that sells.
Or more succinctly and more accurately, sexism sells. And why does sexism sell? Well, because it's not challenging dominant paradigms. It's simply reinforcing ideas about male privilege and entitlement to women's sexuality that are already entrenched in the cultural zeitgeist.
No! Now, inevitably, whenever I face the sexist backlash from feminists throwing their entitled temper tantrum, I have to remind them that I'm not trying to take their chick flicks away from them. I'm just trying to educate them that they were horrible people for ever liking them in the first place. I simply don't get why I get all of this hateful abuse when all I've done is provide this long-form video essay, pop culture critic analysis of chick flicks. I mean, with this deeply problematic media being sold openly in public to reaffirm to misandric women, to validate them, that what they're doing really isn't sexist, is it any wonder that physical assaults on men by entitled women are at epidemic levels, while violent crime against women, say for instance rape, are at an all-time low? Now, seeing as entitlement, or more specifically female entitlement, is at the crux of much of what we've been discussing in this video, let's take a moment to define exactly what female entitlement actually means. First, the word entitlement refers to a conviction that someone deserves something, that they are owed it, that they have a right to it. By extension, female entitlement is the conviction that women are owed something by virtue of their gender.
So, revolves me.
No, it doesn't! Just take me out on the leg!
Because you're not getting Because you're not getting Oh, because I gotta get shit done to my truck.
No, you don't!
Oh, I
Truck is fine!
No, it's fine. You know, right?
It's the belief structure that tells women that they deserve to have their whims catered to.
Please!
It's my day.
Please, take me out of the lake! Why is it so hard?
It's my day to get shit done too. And you're acting like an 11-year-old. Fine, just keep asking people.
I will, and then that's why everybody makes comments at work about you.
When they see this video, they'll understand.
That they deserve to have their whims catered to, both culturally and interpersonally. One of the most harmful aspects of female entitlement is that they have the right to survey and use men's bodies. Women, you can do your part to stop this travesty of sexism from being passed on to the next generation. Write to advertisers and let them know that it's not okay to use male-bodied objects in their adverts. Call it out wherever you see it and become a giant cyclone of change that is unstoppable. You can become an even better ally if you stop playing games where one man is being assessed as a more valuable object than another. Because finding one man more attractive or appealing than another is deeply problematic by virtue of the fact that it's outrageously transparent sexism. Even thinking about it is an act of harassment. Sadly, we've not yet found a way to punish you for your thought rape. So until then, you're just going to have to look in the mirror every day and immolate yourself for your thought crime and remind yourself of what a bitch you are simply for assessing men as objects. You can be a good ally and realize that it's not okay to reduce a man to the level of a sexual object. You can stop buying chick flicks and educate yourself as to what a horrific shitlord you were for ever liking them in the first place. Remember, no one is trying to take your chick flicks away. It's just only that sexist man-haters could possibly advocate for that regressive crap in the first place. This media is responsible for promoting a culture where abuse against men is not taken seriously, and only a sexual predator would want to allow this abuse to pass as free speech. And remember, one of the most sexist things that women can do is deny their sexist behavior by arguing against fact-based long-form video essays like this one, with their bunch of tired old excuses of why it's okay for them to be sexist.
Or more succinctly and more accurately, sexism sells. And why does sexism sell? Well, because it's not challenging dominant paradigms. It's simply reinforcing ideas about male privilege and entitlement to women's sexuality that are already entrenched in the cultural zeitgeist.